our next speaker is not only doing plenty of good himself, he's also created the crowdfunding platform StartSomeGood to help others do the same. It's a great example of working with others and connecting as a team. Can you please make him very welcome to the stage, Tom Dawkins, guys. Big round of applause. Thanks, Tom.
Thanks so much. This is awesome. This might be just about the biggest room I've ever been in. I was meant to sing on the stage of the Opera House once, which would be bigger than this, I imagine. But in my anxiety before we were about to go on stage, when I was in the choir at high school, my dad was running late and I rushed down to the box office one more time just to check whether he'd arrived. And if anyone's ever been to the Sydney Opera House, I wasn't planning to tell this story at all, by the way, but now I'm here. The marble stairs that come like right down in the front entrance, and I kind of tripped over my feet on the top stair and went the entire way down those stairs, collecting an A-frame halfway down and carrying it the rest of the way with me and breaking it in two by the time we hit at the bottom, and spent the rest of the evening in the green room, and so never made it out onto that stage. So I'm feeling good about, I'm here, I'm on the stage, I'm upright, I'm conscious, we're doing really well. Thank you, thank you. It's so cool to be here, guys, because really my passion is how to help people create the future that I think that we all need. And I think it's going to take all of us to create the future that our communities need. You know, this conference is about what is the future that we're creating and how do we come to create that future. And really everything that I've been doing is thinking about these same sorts of issues. These days I'm the co-founder CEO of StartSomeGood.com. But it's been a bit of a journey to get here. So I want to share with you some parts of that journey and a few of the things that I've learned about how we build community around our vision for change, how we build teams around our vision for change on the way. So this is the question that I consume myself with a lot. How do we create social change? What are the different tools at our disposal that we have to create change? And one thing that I think is fundamentally true, almost despite what issue it is that you want to work on or the way in which you approach that, is that we create change together. The old saying of never forget that a small group of people can change the world. In fact, it's almost the only thing that ever has, is absolutely true. Sometimes it's very big groups of people that change the world, but that almost always begins with a small group of people who commit to the act of engaging a bigger group of people to make things happen. And so how is it that we can come together to do this? And I think there's three key things that will underpin your community building efforts in order to make a difference in the world. And the first is exactly what Lucy was talking about earlier, which is purpose. That you need to know what the change you want to create is. You're not going to bring people together united behind making a difference if you don't know what difference you're trying to create. So the second is that you need a platform, and by that I mean you need a way to connect with people. You could have, the most powerful vision in the world, but if you live way deep in the forest and never talk to anyone, no one's going to get the chance to embrace that and become part of your vision or to join you on the journey of making that vision true. And then there's the piece that Murray was kind of talking about, which is story, which is how do we articulate that vision? Where you have a particular vision around the change you want to make, there's a million different ways you can talk about that. Murray gave some great examples of that. It makes a difference whether you say foreign aid or Australian aid. Your vision, your purpose, is the same in either instance. You want a more equal world. You think absolute poverty is a fundamental injustice that needs to be wiped out. This could all be your vision, but whether you describe it as foreign aid or Australian aid will change what people hear and will change their willingness or ability to connect with you and to become part of your team and part of your community. So the story you tell is really, really important. Now, I didn't always have a sense of purpose. None of us did, of course. We grow up with a sense of purpose around kind of eating our next meal and having a good time, and at some point perhaps that begins to blend into a higher range of ideas around the kind of world we want to be part of. Maybe some of you are still looking for that. Maybe some of you have really got clarity around your purpose at the moment. I think you never really know where to look for these sorts of things. For me, the starting point of me finding my sense of purpose began here, in the corridor of my high school after I'd been sent out of English class halfway through year 10. Now this used to happen quite a bit, so it wasn't a particularly unusual situation. Halfway through year 10, I was struggling. I had no idea what I wanted to do with myself. I didn't really see the point of anything. I was a teenager, so typical. I was fighting with my parents, I was getting bullied at school. I came 179th out of 180 kids in my year at maths. I wasn't having a great time. I wasn't doing that well. And it's because I didn't really have any sense of where I was going with any of this stuff. You know, I had to wake up every morning and go to school, but it didn't really connect in my head into any kind of a deeper purpose or any sort of a, you know, even the idea of like graduating uni, a job, none of that stuff really resonated with me. And so I didn't know, I was just going through the motions. And when you just go through the motions, you tend not to do so well. But while on this particular day, while I was standing in the corridor reflecting on the injustice of the world and how I didn't deserve the punishment I was receiving, I found a flyer that someone had dropped, or a brochure on the corridor floor, and it had like muddy footprints on it from being trampled on. But I was so bored and so desperate to do something with my brain for a minute that I picked it up and read it. And it was a brochure for a student exchange program to go to America for a year on a high school student exchange. And I didn't know that existed. I didn't know that was a thing that happened, that you could do, that you could like go away for a year, but I knew that it was exactly what I wanted to do, that I needed to get the hell out of there. And so I went home that night, brandishing this brochure, and said, Mum and Dad, I've decided I'm going to go to America for a year. And my parents, you know, in retrospect, somewhat suspiciously, immediately agreed that that was a really great idea. Now, I couldn't go straight away. I'd missed the catchment for that year. I could only go a year later, and I had to get my grades up to a certain point before I could even participate. So all of a sudden, I was able to do that, because now I had this very direct, you know, I need to get to there in order to achieve this other thing that I wanted. So I understood the connection for the first time between like trying a little harder and achieving this thing that I wanted. And so a year later, I ended up here in Spokane, Washington, 300 miles east of Seattle. Not a place you'd really ever hear about unless you found yourself I don't know, driving from Seattle to Boston or something. And it was an incredible experience for me. You know, it was, you know, I think that's why a lot of people find their purpose while traveling as well. I think, you know, you have to be kind of sometimes outside of your traditional context to see the world in a different way. And so for me, that was the stripping away of everything I knew. You know, it stripped away my friends, my school, my parents, you know, my country, not my language. I wasn't quite that daring. I had friends who were much more ambitious than me and, you know, went to Japan for a year or Brazil for a year or so on, but I limited myself to the English-speaking world. And so that would have been significant enough in and of itself. But while I was in the US, I also had the opportunity to go to a very particular event here in San Francisco called the State of the World Forum. The State of the World Forum was an attempt to kind of begin to articulate a new vision for the world post the Cold War. None of you guys would remember, and I don't really either. But for 50 years, you couldn't talk about anything without talking about the Cold War. You couldn't talk about the environment and sustainability without talking about the Cold War. You couldn't talk about peace and war without talking about the Cold War. You couldn't talk about trade and equality without talking about the Cold War. You couldn't talk about anything without first putting it into the frame of the Cold War. And all of a sudden, that was gone incredibly quickly. And really, people didn't even know how to talk about what is it that we're doing together, where is it that we're trying to go as a global community. And so the State of the World Forum was one of many, both governmental and third sector efforts to kind of to create this conversation and to bring people together. And it brought together the most incredible cast of characters. There was, you know, Mikhail Gorbachev and Margaret Thatcher and Ronald Reagan, you know, like a hall of fame of Cold War leaders. There were 7 Nobel Peace Prize winners. There were business leaders, spiritualists, environmentalists, authors, artists. And then I think quite late in the process of organising, someone said, well, gee whiz, if we're thinking about the future, wouldn't it be nice to have some young people here? But they didn't have the time, the inclination, the budget, the motivation to do this global search for young leaders who would actually deserve that opportunity. So they did the sensible thing you do when you're out of time and under-resourced, and they partnered. And they partnered with AFS, the world's biggest exchange student organisation, to select from young people who are already conveniently located in America. I was already conveniently located in America with AFS, and so I was invited to write an application, one of 6 Australians invited to apply, and I was then selected to attend. And now writing an application was something I could do. I grew up in a political family. My uncle was in federal politics. We argued about that sort of stuff around the dinner table. You know, we were an unusually kind of political, argumentative family. So I had opinions about all sorts of things that I had no right to hold, but I held very passionately and was prepared to argue for. And so I've been asked just to kind of write about things I cared about was what I could do. But had they actually embarked on that search, there's no way I would have been selected, you know, because I'd never done anything apart from argue with my parents over dinner. I'd never organised anything. I'd never been to a protest. I'd never volunteered. Just caught up in my own drama, you know. But I was selected to attend, and it was an experience that really changed my life. Now, the organisers hated this slide. They're like, do you realise slide 8 is a bit fuzzy? I'm like, I do realise. This is the only photo I could find, this experience. This is a photo of my photo, which is clearly over-zoomed in with a not very good camera at the time, but that's Gorbachev, Thatcher, who else was I saying? Thabo Mbeki's on the left there, who was Vice President of South Africa, and later President of South Africa after Mandela. And so this was a really extraordinary experience. I spent a week in San Francisco being told that my voice mattered, essentially. You know, having these incredible people listen to what we had to say, the 32 of us from 28 different countries, all of us between 15 and 17. And it was an incredible experience, you know, to have people who, you know, important people, stop what they were doing and be interested in what we had to say. But coming away from that, I had these really contradictory sensations. On the one hand, I felt very deeply empowered myself, but I also, without much further reflection, realised that what I'd just been the beneficiary of was a broken system of youth empowerment. That this is what youth empowerment traditionally looks like. It's tokenistic, it's haphazard, and it's biased towards wealth. Because while we had a seeming diversity, coming from 28 countries, you know, we had different colour skin, boys and girls, rich world, developing world, but every single one of us had parents who could afford to send us to America for a year on exchange. So we were nowhere near as diverse as we looked. And so I started thinking then, as I still think now, how do we give this experience to everyone? How do we let everyone know that their voice matters? How do we give everyone that experience that I had of being listened to? I've been told that whatever your life experience, that's valid and needs to be heard. And whatever it is we're trying to achieve as a community in the future, we're trying to create, we need you. We need all of you if we're going to get there. And so I did a whole range of things from that point onwards. I founded a high school student organisation, then a university student organisation. But those things then led to me founding an organisation called Vibewire in 2000. And Vibewire was all about building those platforms for young people to express themselves and the issues and cultures that matter to them. And we published magazines, and we ran websites, and we had a film festival that toured around with Dendi of youth-made short films. All of them about getting these voices out there and giving people the skills to actually articulate the things they care about. But then we had a bit of a kind of, I don't know if wake-up call is the right word, but you know, a few years into this journey, we asked ourselves a hard question, which is, what if we don't have the right ideas at all? You know, we're working really hard to kind of create all these opportunities, and then we're bringing them to our peers and saying, here's this opportunity we've created for you. If you're a writer, you should submit to our magazine. You know, if you're a filmmaker, we have a film festival, but the film has to be, you know, these particular parameters and has to work in this, about these particular issues. If you're a, you know, want to be a political journalist, we have some awesome election coverage stuff. But what if you don't want to do any of those things? What if you have a completely different and better idea about something that could be even more empowering for your generation? And what could be more empowering for you than being able to embark on your own idea? So we asked ourselves that question of how do we actually take another step back and not just create these kind of you know, here's a prepackaged opportunity for you, I hope you like it, but rather how do we support you to create whatever it is that you think needs to be created? And so that led us to open the first co-working space in Australia, which is a space called Square One and is now known as the Commons on Harris Street in Ultimo, Sydney in 2006. And obviously now the longest continuously operating co-working space in Australia. When I left Vibewire, I really didn't know what I was going to do with myself, and I ended up at an organisation called Ashoka, which is not so well known in Australia, but is really well known globally, because they were the people who invented the concept of the social entrepreneur about 35 years ago, to describe this thing that no one knew how to talk about at the time, which is people that kind of looked on the surface like entrepreneurs. You know, they were focused on scale and sustainability and systems, but were motivated by social concerns that weren't trying to build wealth. Bill Drayton was the specific guy who coined the phrase social entrepreneur about 35 years ago. And he's very fond of saying, this is Ashoka's focus. You know, you've heard of the old phrase about give someone a fish and they eat once, teach them to fish and they eat for a lifetime. He's like, we're not looking for either of those. We're looking for people who are changing the way fishing happens. It's not enough just to teach someone to fish in the way that fishing has always been done. We need to rethink fishing. And that's, you know, true social entrepreneurship is to think not just in systems level. So they would separate out social entrepreneurship from perhaps charity or welfare or those sorts of things, which is the giving the fish, but they would even bundle teaching people to fish in with that. That's just participating in the status quo. They're looking for people who are reshaping, actually, the connections between the different parts of this industry. And my job was that I was the first social media director there, so I had to think about how can social technologies help create an everyone a changemaker world, which is Ashoka's ultimate mission today, a world where every person has access to the skills, the encouragement, the inspiration, the opportunity to create change in their own way. And one of the things that we really saw was a blockage for that is the challenge of raising early stage money. The social sector hasn't been very good at funding new ideas by people like you. People who, I don't know anything about you, so some of you probably have very impressive track records. But, you know, emerging entrepreneurs and change makers doing something that is unproven. Of course, it's the unproven change is where real change comes from. But the social sector likes funding proven changes. And of course, if it works so well, why are we still working on changing this issue. And this is the opposite of of what we've seen happen in the commercial sector, where it's the craziest ideas that create the biggest changes. It's the stuff that looks like it will never work at first glance that often creates really dramatic, large-scale impacts. And so we set up StartSomeGood to be a place where people could rally a community and raise funds around these new ideas. And actually, that's our brand new brand. We just launched that yesterday. I hope you like it. And this is our new website, which we spent the last 18 months building and quietly unveiled last week. So it's a really exciting time for us to fit this milestone. And what's great about, I guess, the purpose that I've found for myself, or this way of living my purpose, and my sense of purpose is really about how we build infrastructure, how we build platforms for people to participate, and how we inspire more people to get involved, is that I get to spend my whole life meeting other people who are pursuing their purpose as well, and who are using our platform as a way of launching something new into the world that they hope will make a difference. People like JB Green, who's a local social entrepreneur here in Melbourne and launched a company called One Night Stand, which is ethical fashion wear, with the profits going towards homeless causes. Or Speech for Good, which is a whole new approach for doing speech therapy to help people overcome a stutter, which we previously took years and thousands of dollars of speech therapy, and now can be delivered in an app format for $3, provided you have the right device, of course. But even if you were buying the device, $600. Or Words with Heart, a feminist stationery company, producing sustainable stationery that transmits an empowering message and which then sends the proceeds to support women's and girls' education. And this is our record campaign to date, another one here in Melbourne, and food-related, which I know is a big focus of this event, the Food Justice Truck, which is supporting asylum seekers in Melbourne with a 75% discount on food, while allowing all the rest of us to buy food at commercial rates, but locally grown organic. Fruit and vegetable. You can look them up, they're live now, they're in about 4 locations. And this is a great example of what I think about when I think about team. I don't just think about the 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 or however many people on your team, your direct team that you are conjuring up your plans with. I think about the people who are embracing your vision and joining your team as funders, as advocates, as volunteers, as activists, all the people you need to really make a difference. And why I'm so passionate about crowdfunding is because it provides an opportunity for us to kind of go around to go around the government, let's say, and make a direct impact on the things we care about. Because if you're sitting in Melbourne saying, I want asylum seekers in Melbourne to be better taken care of, what's going to change? Nothing unless you make it change. The government's not going to change that. We might have an opportunity to change the government, but in the meanwhile, we could either just kind of write angry letters, or we can get on with doing practical things that can actually make a difference to the people we're trying to help. And so this represents, 1,000 people in Melbourne coming together and say, we're going to do better. Our community can do better, and now we have the tools and the ability to make that happen. And we live in a really interesting time. The time in which these projects are emerging is a really interesting time for social change. It used to be that to get things done with people, to work with people, you kind of had to come together in a room like this or a cubicle farm. You had to be in one place together to figure out how to work together and how to get things done. Whereas now we can build, and so we used to only do that with a few different organisations. We only had so much capacity to turn up to stuff. So our parents' generation tended to pick a couple of causes and often a couple of organisations and stick with them for decades. If you wanted to be involved in Amnesty, it meant turning up to a meeting every month and spending 2 hours with people literally writing letters together live. Whereas now all of us can sign a petition for Amnesty on our phone, and we can get a text message alerts, and we can, you can be an Amnesty activist in 1 minute a week. And that gets derided as slacktivism, but Amnesty will tell you they're grateful for it. And of course it's made participation a much more broadly based thing. But that leads to, instead of these deep ties with a few organisations, we have very loose ties, very light ties with a large number of organisations who have given permission to message us, but we've given that permission to 1,000 different organisations. But while that means institutionally our ties are often a lot weaker, we are creating very deep ties across distance with each other today. So for me, Twitter's been a key place for that. If you're interested in food technologies, I'm sure some of you are, you want food tech. If you're doing stuff around social enterprise in Australia or social entrepreneurship in Australia, you need the SocAntAU hashtag. And by using these hashtags, you'll be able to find other people who care about the same things as you. That's incredibly powerful. And of course, it's not just Twitter. Twitter is what's kind of worked for me most in this area. But for my wife, it's Instagram. She's built very real relationships on Instagram. She's currently running a project with 2 collaborators who she's never met, but connected with through Instagram. Actually, one of them she met last time we were in Melbourne a couple of weeks ago. I was like, haha, meeting friends off the internet, who's a nerd now? But it's finding our own, the channels that work for us to connect with people about the things we most care about. Now, you compare this to when I was founding Vibewire, I was really keen for it not just to be people from Sydney, not just students at my university. I thought, in the very least, I really want to be national, but I thought, what's the nearest proxy for national? It's to have Melbourne as well. Got to have Melbourne and Sydney. But how do I find people in Melbourne who want to collaborate with me? In 1999, 2000, we didn't have Facebook, we didn't have Twitter, didn't really have social media. So the only way I could figure it out was I caught the overnight bus down to Melbourne with a friend. We visited RMIT, Melbourne University, and Monash and stuck posters up, and then got the overnight bus back again and went back to school and worked the next day. And that brought us our first, the first half dozen volunteers from Melbourne that gave us a beachhead here and got things going. And you compare that to StartSomeGood. This is a snapshot of our team a few months ago, but we're all in a different location. There's no two people on that screen who are in the same city. And we're able to connect with each other and collaborate with each other and run a business together across all different locations, time zones, and so on by using the wonderful tools that exist today to enable us to do that. And so the whole idea of what can be your team and the limitations that used to exist around that have completely changed. It's not just that your inner team can now be based anywhere, but there's no need to actually put boundaries around what you think about your team at all. It used to be that there were enormous kind of frictional costs in trying to do things together, having to be in one place when to come together. Those costs have almost vanished. And so there's so many things that weren't worth doing before because they were too hard and involved too much effort that all of a sudden have become below the threshold of viable effort. Wikipedia being just one example. And so when you're thinking about building your team, don't just think about having a co-founder or a small group of people around you. How do you build that team at its broader scale? How do you make other people care about the work you're doing through the way in which you share that story and the way in which you connect with one another? And of course you do that by being real, by being vulnerable, by being human, by talking in a more natural voice. Whereas once we used to pay lots of money to interrupt each other when we were doing the thing we were really wanting to be doing, listening to the radio, watching TV, other people would pay to interrupt. Now we talk to each other in new ways, and I think that's really exciting. And it's that generates the level of actual caring that makes people want to carry your vision forward. And so the question is, how do you make people care? How do you bring that sense of caring? And the way we do that, of course, is through stories. Just like Murray said, stories are the human technology for creating emotional reactions. It's on you to try and tell the right story to get the right response. And so when we think about fundraising, which of course is what I am most focused on with StartSomeGood, that's really just a type of story. It's a story about the future you're creating, and it's an invitation for other people to get involved in creating that future with you. And so I'm a political science major, and we would call that a theory of change. Here's the thing that we can do together, and here's the future we'll create. Now don't call it that. You could think of it as a story of change. Theory of change sounds very political science jargony, but it's just the story of change. This is what we need to do together, and we can make these outcomes happen. And that's all very well, but you've got to get people's attention in the first place, and that will really come down to meeting them where they're at. How do you architect your story in a way that it resonates with the things that people already care about? Because your job when you're team building, now there may be a later time when your job is to convince people to believe something they don't. That time comes about. Obviously a lot of environmental activism is trying to get people to think differently about these issues. But if we're talking about team building, that's not the time or place for that. Team building is about connecting with people who already share your passion. So remember that when you're team building, and crowdfunding and fundraising is team building, not converting. People don't fund you to convince them to think about things differently from the way they think about it already. They fund you to make other people change their minds. Because our politics are always the right politics for us right now, by definition. And so fundraising is team building, always team building. And so don't get caught up in trying to convince people. That's where people lose a lot of time and effort because they want to change people's minds. But instead think about what do people care about right now and how can I connect that to what I'm doing? And we think there's these 5 core genres of stories you can tell about a social change project that connect with people where they're at. And kind of Murray's example is a good one in a way of moving from the issue, the issue story of aid is about the recipients, right? So it's that these people over here are suffering and we can help with that. Aid is the way to do that. That's the issue story. But what he talked about was reframing that into a community story, what we would call a community story, which is that this is what it says about who we are. Australian aid is about who we are as a people and as a nation, not just about the recipient group on the other end. And so it's a really different story and it's connecting with people in a different way. You think about Speech for Good, say, how many people care about the issue story of helping people with a stutter? I mean, anyone with a stutter, obviously, anyone who has a family member with a stutter, but it's pretty nichey. But he also told a story about, look at the power of new technology to create change. We would call that the innovation story, essentially the how story, You may not be interested in stuttering, but boy, the way in which I'm changing stuttering, really interesting, right? Using mobile technology. So that's a way of capturing attention from people who, if you said, let me tell you about stuttering, they've already gone. But if you said, let me tell you about how mobile technology can change the world, they're like, tell me more. So you can talk about the same thing in a variety of different ways to connect with people. So if you are working on a food project, we'd certainly love to work with you because we've had a bunch of success with that. I think food is really one of these, when we think about these different issue stories, of course, food is just this core thing that we all participate in. We all eat every single day. So it's a real chance to link with people about social change, and that's why, of course, this whole event, is framed around food, because food is a way to get people thinking about the future and thinking about the changes we need to make who might not otherwise be as receptive if you hit them over the head with that. Be like, let's talk about what we want to eat tonight. All right. So we've had great success recently with food-related projects on our site, and we'd absolutely love to help any of you. We recently published an ebook, Self-Promotion Alert, just for a moment. But if you are working on a food-related project, you are thinking of crowdfunding, we co-published with some of our successful projects recently an ebook just to share some of their hottest tips as to what worked for them, so you should definitely check that out. And so if you do want to crowdfund, though, these are the key thing to take away is to remember that it's team building. When we're thinking about team building, it's one and the same. So you're not raising money, and this is why the word crowdfunding is incredibly unhelpful and deceptive, because there is no such thing as a crowd out there who's going to fund your project. They don't exist. And if you think of them in that way, if you think, oh yeah, I'm just going to raise money from the crowd, you're kind of making them all into these anonymous people that you don't know and don't care about, but you're expecting them to pour money into your project, and it doesn't work that way. Crowdfunding is about inspiring people to join your team, to add their weight to your effort to drag the world forward in some way. And crowdfunding only succeeds when people do more than just contribute. They actually advocate as well. They actually become part of the collective effort involved in making crowdfunding succeed. And so long as you approach it in that way and you remember that it's not just about extracting money from anonymous citizens of the internet, it's actually about being intentional about who are the people who will connect with this story, or with this vision. What's the right way to architect my story to make them listen? What are the platforms I need to use to reach them and connect with them and empower them? And crowdfunding might be one of those platforms. And then approaching it in that more personal, more intentional way will get you the results that you want. And ultimately, it's about building this sense of ownership, that you want people to feel like they are a co-founder of your project, that they are right there with you helping to create that future. Because when people have that sense of ownership, it's what really carries you forward, well beyond the dollars and cents. Like Jack said, he originally, he raised his seed funding to launch Speech for Good on our platform, but a year later that money was all gone. It was spent. But the community wasn't. The community is still with him now, 3 years later. And so it's that group of early adopters, those passionate kind of co-founders that Jack was able to inspire around his project, that have actually been the resource, the asset, that has carried him forward to the success and the impact that he wanted to create, not just the dollars and cents he raised in those 30 days. So if you're interested in changing the world, we have to do it together. I would love to be part of your team, if you are doing work to change the world. And so I want to make a special offer just to you guys. If you do decide to try out StartSomeGood, and of course I'd love it if you did, and you launch a fundraiser with us before the end of January, email me at tom@startsomegood.com and I'll be your first donor. I'll chip into every one of your campaigns, like $20, just to set expectations appropriately. Don't earn a lot of money running these startup social enterprise. But the early donors, we always talk about day one donors are the most powerful, and I would like to be one of your day one donors to help get the ball rolling for you with your campaign if you're trying to do something to change the world, because I am so pleased that you're all here. I'm so pleased you're engaging with these issues, and I can't wait to see what you all create. Thank you.